Hey there guys, this is Obsidian Chill. Got another video for today. This is coming from the test server. What I'm going to be doing in this video is giving you more of an in-depth breakdown of the Claw of Aelkhund. This is an artifact that recently came out with the last four, so like the Symbol Mystic of the Seven, Philosopher's Stone, the Grinorum pet artifact. So with this new DLC, we've had 4 new artifacts. I kind of briefly touched on it in my previous video. This is going to be giving a more in-depth preview at how this artifact is actually viable and what it does and the instances that it actually is helpful. So let's get into that now. Okay, so what essentially this artifact does is it changes your instant power regen as a controller. So basically, we'll kind of read it here. So while in controller, your group weapon buff, and basically your group weapon buff is just a recharge, your instant power ability. It applies to you and 7 group members. In addition, grants 7% might, restoration, and dominance for 12 seconds, but no longer power heals. What that means is, say without the controller artifact on, if I still hit defibrillator, this is going to give instant power out to everyone. It's going to give me power over time, instant power every time I hit it. It's got a 1.5 second cooldown, and that's basically what I do. Now as well, it still applies the 20% precision and 20% weapon DPS. This is how it does on live. It's just that's always the case. That's one of the reasons why precision DPS is so strong, is because regardless, they've always got this buff from the controllers. Now what this Claw artifact does is it changes defibrillator, changes recharge, temporal extortion. It changes it to where if I hit recharge, it's not going to give any power. It's going to get power over time, or if you still have power over time ticking. But if it's the first power hit, it's going to start pot. But it's going to give no power out. All it's going to do is give a buff out for 12 seconds. So if we kind of just equip it here, just to kind of briefly show it here. So I've hit defibrillator. The cooldown on defibrillator stays the exact same, but as you can see, I've got this animation on me now. Let me just hit it again here. It used to have a really obnoxious sound, but they took that away, so it just has the visual effect, which is basically like frost armor, but it's like the ice armor, but it's like orange and yellow. That's essentially what it is. But now if I hit defibrillator, Now, if I hit defibrillator and go into the current effects now, it's going to show the same thing, the 20% weapon and precision, but it's going to have 7% dominance, restoration, and might for 12 seconds. And then basically 12 seconds just lines up with everything else. But so I'll say I have defibrillator, even though it's a 1.5 second cooldown, if I keep hitting it, it's going to do nothing. It's not going to restore any power usage. It's basically just like it turns into like a clipping move. Because as a controller, this is what your recharge instant power would be, but now it's going to do nothing as long as you're wearing this artifact. So we kind of go back to it here. Now increases your passive power generation for a controller by 20%. So what this means is your power regen yourself gets increased a little bit, and then after casting your group weapon buff or defibrillator, whatever you recharge, gain 3% VIT per group member with supplementing energies on them for 12 seconds. What this means is that everyone around, like say, you can kind of see an example when I did it before. So if I do defibrillator without it wearing it, just defibrillator in my hand proc. Now if I put the claw on, go back to defibrillator. Now you're going to see the claw, so it's going to give 3% VIT. So basically every player that has the buff on them is going to, that's what that means. So basically every player that has the group buff on them is going to give you an extra 3% VIT. So essentially what this does is it takes away your instant recharge ability, instant recharge power to the group, and just increases your VIT, which basically in turn increases your power over time. So we can kind of get an example here. I know it's not going to be too much because I'm in a DPS spec right now. So 92, 31 VIT without the claw. And if we're putting it on, so the other kind of drawback as well, it's not noticed as much, but since his artifact doesn't have any VIT, so if I go to like another, I don't think I have an actual control artifact here, but the other control artifacts itself, like 5% VIT, 3% VIT, even the Gemini has 3% VIT. So really, you don't gain any extra VIT unless you have a group member buffed, because you're going to lose 5% VIT just by wearing the artifact anyway. But we'll kind of get into that again. So basically 9,000 VIT, and like I said, if I hit defibrillator, it's probably going to put me back at like the 92, 31. So that's my power over time tick itself is not going to change because I need multiple group members to actually have that. Now, that being said, if a group member dies, or say you're doing an 8-man raid, 3 people die, then yes, your VIT is going to get decreased by 6% because those players aren't going to be receiving that buff anymore. So that's another kind of drawback to that as well. But basically, there's two niches where this can be used. Yes, there's going to be groups that don't need a lot of power. They're pretty much self-sufficient, precision DPS. Maybe the healers don't need content, or don't need a lot of healers, don't need a lot of power. Or it's like older regular content. There's going to be cases where the group is getting way too much power, so you can switch this on and kind of buff the group. But at the same time, that principle doesn't always work, because if it's an older regular raid, you don't need 7% extra restoration or dominance. The 7% might is helpful. It's basically like an Omega is 5%, and then this would be 7%. If there's a DPS running the Tetra with high enough health, then it kind of negates that. But it's still all an addition. But what I'm saying is that if an older regular raid that doesn't need any power, then buffing the group by this much is not going to really translate to much. But we'll show you the instance where this is actually helpful and what you should be using if you want to take this route. Okay, so I'm going to show you the one instance where the Claw artifact becomes completely viable, and the ideal setup you should be running with it if you're going to choose to go this route and use this artifact. So basically, I'm in DPS stance as gadgets, gadget single target rotation. I'm full gadgets DPS gear. My artifacts are DPS spec'd. I got 42,000 might. So I'm going to show you what this rotation parses with in DPS, like regular DPS stance, and then I'm going to put it on control stance with the Claw, and then show you what it parses at as well. And then basically you'll be able to see what I'm talking about in a moment here. Okay, so that was the gist of the single target rotation, just showing it as DPS stance, 27, 28, lost power, 29. So obviously strong single target rotation for gadgets. This is DPS stance, and now we're going to put the Claw on to show you what the same rotation does in troll stance, wearing DPS gear. Like everything the same, it's going to be wearing DPS gear in troll stance with the Claw. So we'll show you that here. Okay, so I'm still wearing DPS gear. Still DPS mods. I'm in troll stance. The same rotation. Just obviously now instead of robot psyche, I have to run defibrillator because I have to proc that buff. And it still leaves me at 42, 535 might because the Claw artifact has 3% might. So I still don't drop that much at all. And then the buff obviously will be 7% on top of that. So now let's show you what that rotation does as gadgets, but in troll stance. Right, so as you can see with the parsers, I'm still getting 24, 25, 21, ignore the 19, 9% crit chance, so that's garbage. Just ignore that one. But as you can see, it's still a consistently decent single target rotation, and I'm in troll. As you can see, I'm in troll stance. I'm still wearing DPS gear. I just have the claw on. I'm still standing at like 42,000 might. When I'm buffed with defibrillator, though, that goes up to 44,000 might, and so will the entire group. So you basically you have a DPS player. As a controller, you're basically your DPS player, just switching to troll stance, doing your rotation the exact same way you would do with DPS, except you got to use defibrillator as a clip move, or it works with gadget as well, because obviously I can line up a stealth every 12 seconds, so I know exactly when I have to reapply the claw buff. But like I'll show you munitions here, an example as well. But as you can see, it's still viable to use this single target rotation in controller stance. And now I'm giving 5% might to all the other DPS. I'm giving 5% resto and dom to the tanks and healers. So essentially, yes, you're sacrificing some damage, because obviously you're not going to do as good as the 29, 28Ks as DPS stance. But the drop off's not that severe. Where if you want to help your group and buff your group and kind of help your clear content and buff everyone, this is how you do it. You basically, you're still straight DPS. I have nothing to do with controlling whatsoever, and you're just using a regular DPS rotation. So you don't have to worry about using like a bunch of debuffs and give power and pot. Like, it's not about that. It's you're buffing the group. You're giving them the 7% might, resto, and dom, while you're still maintaining your viability as a DPS, because you still have access to everything else. Okay, so just showing the example as a munitions DPS. So same thing. I'm fully DPS gear, same artifacts, the 42k might, DPS stance. Single target rotation is munitions DPS. So same thing. I'll show this as DPS in stance, and then troll stance with the claw to show you the comparison. Okay, and with the munitions rotation, same thing. I biffed on some power rotations there, but you still get the gist of it. 20, 20, 23, 22, 24, 21, like still, above average single target for dimensions DPS. And now let's show you in troll stance wearing the claw, and then we'll see how the comparison goes. Okay, so you can see I'm troll stance there. I've got the exact same rotation. I've got the claw on, same thing, regular DPS artifacts. I guess you have to have soul amplifier because you need heat vision. You could technically put like Gemini on or something if you don't want to run the soul cloak with a supercharge, but big gun, you're not going to be using it as often anyway because it's 100%, but that's just munition specific. So same thing. So my might's slightly higher, 42,535, and this is what the same rotation is going to be in troll stance. Okay, so you can still see the parsers, 20K, well, 16K was there's power. But 20K, 19K, 19K, 18.3, and that's all with just running with the claw. So I'm still doing decent single target damage, but I'm also giving that 7% buff to all the other DPS, the restoration and dominance for the healers and tanks. And as well as, I didn't really mention this with the gadget side, but depending on your control of power set, whether you're hard, like quantum, whatever, but like say as munitions right here, I'm using multi-net, so it's going to be the heal debuff. So I've got a regular debuff in this rotation that I can help debuff targets or keep a healing debuff on. But since my dominance is going to be so low because I'm wearing DPS gear, I don't have to worry about being like pulling enemies or anything like that. So depending on the rotation, I can still have debuffs to help out to save the other controller power or what have you, because the heal debuff would always be up, for example, in this munitions example. But as you can see, it's still perfectly it's still perfectly viable to have the claw artifact, but it's going to be in a very specific instance, being DPS gear. So basically all you're doing is just DPS gear, hit the roll change button. Let's get out of combat here. So basically you just DPS gear, hit the roll change button, now you're a troll, and then that's what you do. Same rotation, same everything, just in troll stance with the claw artifact on. And that's how you have to approach this artifact. And it's got a promising future. But Tuba mentioned that the artifact could tie into some other artifacts, like we have all those health artifacts, like the first ones, like the Tetra, the Cog, Starheart, and what I forget what the controller one is. It was garbage, but all the artifacts like the Distor Refractor, like they all played off health. And now if they're going to do the same kind of artifact and buff it in the future, or kind of give more synergy with it, it's going to become more viable. But if you want to run the claw artifact, if you want to help out your group, or if you want to increase their buffs, this is how you have to approach it. Basically, just think of yourself not as a controller. You're a DPS and troll stance wearing the claw. So that's the only thing. That's how you have to approach this artifact to make it become viable. Take care, guys. If you have any questions, put them in the comment section below.